has allowed us to investigate the confluence of past, present, and emergent future, particularly as these forces intersect in the lived experience of individuals. It has, moreover, revealed the disparate and frequently imbricated social forces which coalesce in the lives of communities and various other social and cultural formations. Writing in the mid-20th century, renowned American anthropologist Clifford Geertz famously argued rather abstractly that anthropology is, quote, not an experimental science in search of law, such as physics, but an interpretive one in search of meaning. As this meaning can be found in all cultural forms and arguably in every human endeavor, the discipline then has flourished and expanded accordingly. It is, however, not entirely unique in this pursuit, as many of the social sciences like sociology and humanities like history, art history, and archaeology participate in this scholarly effort. Where anthropology ultimately tends to differ is in its methodology, ethnography. Ethnography as method came to the academic fore, most notably in the 1920s with the scholarship of the English-Polish anthropologist Branislaw Malinowski. Malinowski conducted much of his ethnographic work with the indigenous people of the Trobriand Islands off the coast of Papua New Guinea, where he studied the economic, symbolic, and religious practices of the archipelagic community. His most notable work, titled, curiously, Argonauts of the Western Pacific, was originally published in 1922. While Malinowski's theoretical and analytic contributions to the discipline has, now 100 years on, been eclipsed by other works, the methodology which he pioneered remains still for the most the stock of anthropologists. This methodology, ethnography, is characterized by spatial, temporal, cultural, and linguistic immersion, a modus operandi which Malinowski pithily referred to as a method of, quote, living right among the natives and of getting the hang of tribal life. Ethnography has since then also been referred to as deep hanging out. Since that first trip to the Western Pacific, the ethnographic panoply has come to contain various methods, including interviews both semi-formal and formal, focal follows, photography or photoethnography, observation, archival and historical documentation, demography and mapping, and, of course, most importantly, participation in the practices and discourses that make up a community's everyday, social, relational, embodied, and, in the case of Mount Athos, inspirited life. The typical fieldwork stint lasts 1 to 2 calendrical years and leads, when coupled with a reflection and writing period of equal or greater time, to specific social gender relations. Indeed, and I would argue unsurprisingly, much important work has been conducted with Orthodox women in Greece, both in rural and urban contexts. A much smaller number of academic texts have treated Greek Orthodox monasticism and the Athenite community in particular. While there are several published and unpublished manuscripts, I here highlight two, one much older, one more recent. The first, which you see here, is the work of sociologist Michael Choukis, assistant professor of sociology at Dartmouth College in the United States, who published his peculiarly titled book, The Black Angels of Athos, in 1935. Chief among his academic concerns were, quote, the motives and social forces that caused men to desert social life for the most sheltered one of the cave and cloister, end quote. Although this theme and model is common in social sciences, as many may recognize, it's the push-pull factor model common in migration studies of the past century. The work's inherent issues become evident even from its prologue. Speaking on the conflicting favorable and unfavorable accounts of Mount Athos that he received from friends in mainland Greece, Choukis writes, quote, the peculiar phenomenon is clear to me now, after a summer's stay on the mountain. It reflects the very nature of Athos, a world of extremes. For in this community, man has not only lost his sense of humor, but also his balance and sense of proportion. To a man of our world, women are not permitted to set foot on the Athenite land, nor female animals their hooves. Athos is full of surprises and the unusual. The exotic prevails, and what we may consider normal is either totally absent or taboo. The rational has blended with the irrational, the old with the new, and the product is baffling at first, though fascinating. Much of this revealing of poetic language is sprinkled throughout the book, a fact which can be gleaned much quicker by the book's very title, again, The Black Angels of Athos. Choukis' exoticist and orientalist presumptions about the monastic community of Athos are evident, and indeed the author makes no attempt to hide them. I mean, the word exotic appears above. As such, he sees not much beyond an image of an irrational, baffling, humorless, unbalanced community he had, I would argue, formulated before ever setting foot on the peninsula. Though it contains some useful ethnographic information, this book is ultimately another example of Western Europe and America's Orientalist image of post-Ottoman and even post-pagan Greece. Unsurprisingly, by the epilogue, Choukis anticipates the collapse of the monastic community by, quote, the next generation or sooner, so presumably in the 1950s. This community, it seems, may have a long past and present, if precarious, but no future at all. This, I think, is as much a result of the time as it is of the man. Less than 10 years before the publication of this book, Sigmund Freud famously publishes The Future of an Illusion, in which he too foresees the end of religion and the advent of a rational age for humanity. That aside, and I won't expand on it here, this image of a community with a rich past but no future is reproduced even in contemporary descriptions of the Holy Mountain and by the most well-meaning of commentators, I would argue both non-academic and academic alike. Protestant and Eurocentric presumptions aside, the work exhibits a dubious methodological approach as well. The ethnographic period was far too short even by the standards of the time, and in an incredibly problematic breach of trust, Choukis did not inform the monks he studied of the true reason he was there. He lied to them, at the same time that he took advantage of Athenite hospitality. All this said, the book remains useful for, if nothing else, the ethnographic tidbits which concern the various monks and monasteries Choukis quotes and discusses respectively. Moreover, it can be argued that the book, and I grant that this is indeed debatable, did reorient the relationship that American and Western European academia had with Mount Athos at a point when this relationship was mediated in large part through those disciplines that were most concerned with Athos's past. Is titled «Η αμφισημία του χαρίσματος, οι γέροντες του Αγίου Όρους στη σύγχρονη ελληνική κοινωνία». Ethnographic data for this work was collected over 2 years between 2012 and 2014, while Psaltou was a teacher in the Athoniada school in Karyes. He reports, moreover, that the majority of his data comes from one anonymous communal monastery, presumably a Greek-speaking one. The book, per its title, is most concerned with the category of grace, charisma, not as it appears in theological and hymnological writing, but as it manifests and connects with, quote, real actions of people. He uses the phrase «πραγματική δράση των ανθρώπων». Interestingly, Psaltou employs psychoanalytic theory, particularly Lacanian psychoanalysis to be exact, to argue for a particular type of relationship that contemporary Athonite monks have with, quote, Greek society. He writes, «Η λειτουργία του χαρίσματος ήταν και εξακολουθεί να είναι μία λειτουργία στην υπηρεσία ατομικών ή συλλογικών φαντασιώσεων της σύγχρονης ελληνικής κοινωνίας. Οι αφηγήσεις που επιβεβαιώνουν το διορατικό και ιαματικό χάρισμα κάποιων γερόντων, ειδικά των Αγίων Παϊσίου, Πορφυρίου και Ιωσήφ, λειτουργήσαν στην υπηρεσία της φαντασίωσης πολλών ανθρώπων, οι οποίοι επιδιώκουν να έχουν ένα όπλο απέναντι στις εμπειρίες ανασφάλειας και άγχους στις κοινωνικές και βιολογικές συνθήκες της ζωής τους. Important to note here, the term fantasy, fantasiosi, is a Lacanian psychoanalytic term which indexes specifically a mechanism of the unconscious. The details are not exactly germane to this discussion. Psaltus's work has made important strides in the anthropology and scholarship of Manathos, I would argue. It has responsibly described a community that is not only alive and thriving in the 21st century, but one that is also connected and consequential within the broader Orthodox Greek and European world. While his theoretical approach raises some questions, and I'll address those in a bit, Psaltus's treatment of the Athenic community is, in my estimation, commendable. My own academic and ethnographic research is informed by much of this work. For a period of 16 months between 2021 and 2023, I conducted ethnographic fieldwork on Mount Athos and in Athenite dependencies in Greece and abroad. Research was mainly conducted on the peninsula, and research participation was not limited to Athenite monks and novices, and included pilgrims and other laymen, short and long-term laborers on the peninsula, and dependency parishioners, both men and women. In the monastery of St. Demetrius, in the monastery of St. Demetrius, which is a metonym for the monastery I did work in, I worked mainly in the guest house. While my immersion in the monastery came with personal cost and sacrifice, malnourishment, and sleep deprivation in particular, it ultimately allowed me to embed myself into the lives that constitute the community to a substantial degree. Whenever I happened to describe my work on Mount Athos to someone who knew about the community, the question that I was always nearly met with concerned the condition of my access to it. How did you get in? I usually indicated that the circumstances of my admission to the peninsula for fieldwork revolved around a series of fortuitous meetings that took place in Athens. Luck. One man from Thessaloniki, who visits the community often, winced a bit at this answer. You know, he said, you're the only one that's done that. The monks don't like to grant access to their lives, so it's hard to get access. But there's no such thing as luck. Another man who had an intimate relationship with the particular Athenite monastery that I was to spend a year in excitedly proclaimed, St. Demetrius sent you. To come into the material and spiritual universe of Orthodox Christian and Athenite monasticism is to be brought into a series of relations that one may or may not have been already in, and even may or may not have been aware of. To my informant, St. Demetrius always stood at the other end of a relationship I believed I had with aorist luck. My forthcoming dissertation project, which currently stands at quite a preliminary stage, seeks to document the creation and maintenance of these and other types of spirit relationships of care and support on the Holy Mountain and in its dependencies outside of the peninsula. The dissertation's tentative title is, quote, Caring for the Spirit, Camaraderie, and Asceticism on the Holy Mountain, Athos. While Mount Athos is today geographically isolated, as it's always been, and its social conditions stand in stark opposition to much of contemporary Greek and European life, over the past few decades, that community has become a hub for thousands of Orthodox Christian men pursuing monastic asceticism, pilgrimage, and even labor opportunity. Similarly, as has arguably always been the case, the monasteries and monks of Mount Athos maintain tangible relationships with the outside world and its denizens, including most notably women, who have no access to the peninsula itself. Dependencies frequently act as special nodes for these heterogendered relationships. Moreover, pilgrims and peninsula laborers too constitute relational links that bridge the Athenite world divide. My forthcoming dissertation examines this condition by asking why and in what ways does this 1,000-year-old monastic community, with famously or infamously robust borders and regulations, remain important for the spiritual and social life of so many Orthodox Christian men and women. While I do not argue for a universal pull factor, the research I conducted while living and working in the community revealed that for most, Mount Athos is understood as a unique material and immaterial place in which one can, quote, actively care for their spirit, and in which spirits can be cared for by human and divine others, by St. Demetrius, as in the previous example. And while these spirits transcend the material borders of and even the materiality of Mount Athos itself, they do so, I argue, in specific ways and not absolutely. What I'm translating as care includes several Greek terms, including Phrodida, but also kaloia and what have you. And what I'm translating as spirit also includes a cluster of words, pneuma, psyche, and kardia. I specifically follow works that understand care as both embodied and intersubjective, and as always embedded in and inflected by particular social, cultural, and institutional contexts. I understand this care as including a set of embodied practices oriented around active homosocial and heterosocial camaraderie and support, which members of the community understood as bearing fruit in both this life and the next. Moreover, this process functioned as a means of cultivating and living an ethical spiritual life within an increasingly, in their estimation, unethical and hostile Greece, Europe, and world. Finally, I argue that this care is not foreclosed to women in a straightforward way, though the care, is inflected by the material and social border of the peninsula. This research will thus elucidate the ways in which contemporary monastic care regimes foster particular gendered forms of spirituality and devotion. In the time I spent conducting this research, the monks I met monks whose lives began outside of Greece and Orthodox Christianity, but are now, as they report, next to the saints, pilgrims who invoke daily those embodied angels, the known and unknown fathers of Athos, peninsula workers who see their wages as blessed by Mary and so auspicious, and women who find a spiritual refuge on the peninsula, despite the fact that it can never act as a material one for them. Importantly, and I conclude here, I do not find, as Psaltu does, that these relationships are rooted in human psychology, and I do not treat make progress in understanding religion or religious life by reducing it to some other social or biosocial force, like psychology as Freudians do, like economy as Marxist scholars do, and even like social organization, as Durkheimians do. My work ultimately seeks to understand how the spirit bears upon human life as such, and how it can produce new possibilities for human relationality and care. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And